The cold air of December 4th, 2023, greeted us as we arrived at the campsite deep within the silent forest. The tall, shadowy trees loomed over us, casting eerie silhouettes against the dimming sky. We set up our tents, trying to ignore the unsettling quiet that enveloped the area. As night fell, the forest seemed to come alive with strange, distant noises, unlike anything we had ever heard. An uneasy feeling settled over us as we gathered around the campfire, exchanging nervous glances. That first night, sleep eluded us. The sounds grew louder, echoing through the forest like whispers carried on the wind. I lay awake, straining to catch a glimpse of whatever was out there. In the dim light of the dying fire, I saw shadows flitting between the trees. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could feel the fear creeping in. No one spoke, but I knew we were all feeling the same dread. The next morning, we discovered unusual tracks around our campsite. They were large, clawed footprints that didn't match any known animal. Panic started to seep into our group as we debated whether to stay or leave. Despite our growing fear, curiosity got the better of us, and we decided to stay one more night. We hoped to uncover the mystery of the silent forest, though a part of me wished we had left right then. As the day wore on, the tension in our group grew palpable. We explored the surrounding woods, hoping to find some explanation for the tracks. The deeper we ventured, the more unsettling it became. We found strange markings on the trees, almost like ancient symbols. Just before dusk, one of us spotted a shadowy figure lurking in the distance. It disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, leaving us more terrified than ever. That night, as we huddled around the campfire, the atmosphere was thick with fear. We shared stories of creatures and legends, each one more frightening than the last. The sounds in the forest seemed to mock us, growing louder and more menacing. I could feel the eyes of the forest upon us, watching our every move. We decided that if the strange events continued, we would leave at first light. Little did we know, the forest had other plans for us. Another sleepless night passed as the strange noises persisted, growing louder and more unnerving. We huddled together, clutching flashlights, our eyes darting around the dark forest. Each rustle of leaves or snap of a twig sent chills down our spines. The tension was unbearable, and we knew we couldn't stay another night. But as dawn broke, our resolve wavered. Something kept us there, a mix of fear and curiosity. That morning, the eerie silence returned, making the forest feel even more ominous. We discovered more tracks and signs of disturbance around our campsite. The decision to explore further was unanimous, albeit reluctant. As we ventured deeper, the forest seemed to close in around us, the trees taller and the shadows darker. Then, we saw it again. A fleeting glimpse of a shadowy figure moving swiftly among the trees. Fear gripped us, but we were too scared to turn back. In the afternoon, we stumbled upon an old abandoned cabin. It looked like it hadn't been used in years, covered in vines and moss. Inside, we found remnants of previous campers, tattered clothes, rusty tools, and faded photographs. The discovery sent a wave of dread through us. It was clear that we weren't the first to encounter whatever lurked in the silent forest. A sense of foreboding hung in the air as we left the cabin and returned to our campsite. That evening, the atmosphere was even more tense. We couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The strange noises resumed, this time closer and more distinct. We sat around the fire, trying to keep our spirits up, but the fear was palpable. As the night wore on, the noises became deafening. We saw movement at the edge of our camp, shadowy figures darting in and out of sight. Panic set in, and we knew we had to leave. In the dead of night, we hastily packed our belongings. As we tried to leave, a creature appeared, blocking our path. It was unlike anything we had ever seen, a grotesque mix of shadows and claws. We screamed and scattered in different directions, desperate to escape. The forest became a maze, every path looking the same. In the chaos, we lost sight of each other. Alone and terrified, I realized we were trapped, with no way out. In the frantic scramble, we were all separated. The forest, which had seemed vast during the day, now felt like a claustrophobic labyrinth. My heart raced as I ran blindly, branches scratching my face and arms. The creature's guttural growls echoed behind me, driving me forward. I could hear the distant shouts of my friends, but they were drowned out by the pounding of my own heart. I tripped over roots and stumbled through the underbrush, the realization dawning on me. We were being hunted. I found a momentary refuge behind a large boulder. My breath came in ragged gasps, and my mind raced, trying to make sense of the nightmare we had stumbled into. The forest was unnaturally silent again, as if it were holding its breath. I knew the creature was close, and my only chance was to keep moving. Summoning every ounce of courage, I crept forward, hoping to find a path out of this living nightmare. As I moved through the trees, I spotted one of my friends, Jamie, huddled against a tree, wide-eyed with terror. We exchanged a look of mutual desperation and fear. We both knew that staying put was not an option. Whispering urgently, we decided to head towards a stream we had crossed earlier, hoping it would lead us out. The sounds of the forest returned, but they were different now, more sinister, as if mocking our plight. We made our way through the dense forest, the sounds of pursuit ever present. The creature seemed to be toying with us, letting us catch glimpses of it, always staying just out of reach. Every crack of a twig or rustle of leaves sent waves of panic through us. Jamie stumbled, falling to the ground with a cry. As I helped him up, we both saw it clearly for the first time. A shadowy, twisted figure, eyes glowing with a malevolent light. It let out a low growl, and we ran for our lives. Desperation turned into chaos as we reached the stream, only to find it swollen from recent rains, the current too strong to cross. We were trapped. The creature emerged from the shadows, its form shifting and melding with the darkness around it. In that moment, I knew we couldn't outrun it. The forest had become a prison, and the creature its warden. As it closed in, Jamie and I realized that we had to make a stand, no matter the cost. Jamie and I stood our ground, knowing there was no escape. The creature circled us, its eyes gleaming with a predatory hunger. The air was thick with tension, and the sounds of the forest seemed to fade into a chilling silence. We picked up whatever we could find: branches, rocks, anything that could serve as a weapon. As the creature lunged, we struck out in desperation, hoping to fend it off. Our attacks were futile. It was too strong and too fast. In the chaos, we stumbled upon a hidden cave entrance, partially concealed by overgrown foliage. We dashed inside, hoping the narrow passage would keep the creature at bay. The cave was dark and damp, the air thick with the smell of earth and decay. We ventured deeper, guided by the faint light of our dying flashlights. The creature's growls echoed behind us, growing fainter as we moved further into the cave. For a moment, we felt a glimmer of hope. Deeper into the cave, we found signs that others had sought refuge here before us. Old camping gear, scraps of clothing, and faded graffiti on the walls hinted at previous victims. The sense of dread returned, stronger than ever. It became clear that this cave was not a sanctuary, but a trap. We pressed on, the walls closing in around us, the air growing colder. Jamie and I exchanged fearful glances, both of us realizing that we might not make it out alive. At the heart of the cave, we stumbled upon a gruesome sight. The remains of past victims were scattered around, some barely recognizable as human. Fear surged through us, and Jamie began to panic, his breaths coming in short, frantic gasps. We heard the creature's growls once more, echoing through the cave. It was close, too close. We needed to find a way out, but the cave seemed to twist and turn in on itself, every passage leading us deeper into the darkness. In our desperation, we found a narrow tunnel leading upward. It was a tight squeeze, but it seemed to be our only chance. As we climbed, the creature's growls grew louder, reverberating through the cave like a death knell. We pushed ourselves harder, ignoring the scrapes and bruises from the jagged rocks. Finally, we saw a faint light above, a possible exit. With renewed determination, we climbed faster, the creature hot on our heels. We were so close to freedom, but I knew in my heart that the forest wouldn't let us go so easily. With the light of freedom just above us, we scrambled up the narrow tunnel. Our bodies ached from the climb, but the thought of escaping the creature's clutches drove us forward. As we neared the exit, the growls grew louder, almost deafening. We emerged into the forest, gasping for breath, but there was no time to rest. The creature burst from the tunnel behind us, its eyes burning with rage. In a desperate bid to slow it down, Jamie and I grabbed large branches, brandishing them like weapons. The creature lunged at us, and we fought back with every ounce of strength we had left. The battle was fierce and frantic, the forest around us seeming to pulse with a sinister energy. In a heart-wrenching moment, Jamie was struck down, his body collapsing to the ground. I screamed in anguish, the sound echoing through the trees. Fueled by a mix of fear and anger, I swung my branch with all my might, landing a blow on the creature's head. It stumbled back, giving me a brief moment to act. I grabbed Jamie's hand, pulling him up, but he was barely conscious. With no other choice, I carried him, pushing through the pain and exhaustion. The creature was relentless, and I knew we couldn't outrun it for long. The forest seemed to close in around us, each tree a silent witness to our struggle. As we ran, we stumbled upon a clearing with an old, decrepit cabin. It was our last hope. I dragged Jamie inside, barricading the door with whatever I could find. The creature pounded on the walls, its growls filling the air. We were trapped, but at least we had a moment to catch our breath. Jamie's condition was worsening, and I knew we needed help. The cabin had a dusty old radio, and with trembling hands, I tried to get it working. Miraculously, the radio crackled to life. I sent out a frantic distress call, praying that someone would hear us. Outside, the creature's attacks grew more violent, the door starting to splinter. As the minutes dragged on, hope seemed to slip away. Then through the static, a voice responded. Help was on the way, but would it arrive in time? Jamie's breathing was shallow, and I held him close, whispering reassurances that felt hollow even to me. The creature's growls turned to a furious roar, and the door gave way. It burst into the cabin, and I stood protectively in front of Jamie, ready to face our fate. Just as it lunged, the sound of helicopters filled the air, and bright lights flooded the cabin. The creature hesitated, then retreated into the shadows. Rescue had arrived, but the forest had taken its toll. We were saved, but the memories of that night would haunt us forever. The silent forest had claimed another part of our souls, and we left, forever changed. On November 29th, 2021, we arrived at an isolated camp deep within the Whispering Pines. The towering trees loomed over us, their branches swaying gently in the cold breeze. As we set up our tents, a sense of unease settled in. Strange markings covered the trunks of the trees, almost as if someone had carved them long ago. That night, as we gathered around the campfire, the wind seemed to carry faint whispers, making our skin crawl. The first night was unsettling. The whispers grew louder, echoing through the pines and blending with the rustling leaves. We tried to sleep, but the eerie sounds kept us awake. My mind raced with thoughts of old legends and ghost stories. In the dim light of the fire, shadows seemed to move on their own. I felt a presence, something watching us from the darkness. We all felt it, though no one dared to speak of it. The next morning, we discovered an old, tattered journal hidden beneath a pile of leaves. The pages were brittle, filled with hastily scribbled notes about strange encounters in the forest. As we read, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. The journal spoke of creatures that roamed the woods, unseen but always present. Fear gripped us as we realized we were not alone. The camp, once a place of adventure, had turned into a living nightmare. Determined to uncover the truth, we ventured further into the woods. The markings on the trees grew more frequent, forming a twisted path that seemed to beckon us deeper. We stumbled upon the ruins of an old camp, long abandoned and overgrown. Signs of recent activity were everywhere: footprints, broken branches, and the remnants of a fire. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening, as if the trees themselves were trying to warn us. That night, the atmosphere was thick with fear. We huddled together, our eyes darting around the dark forest. The whispers had turned into distinct voices, speaking in an unknown language. The journal had mentioned this, calling it the Curse of the Pines. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could see the same fear reflected in my friend's eyes. We decided to stay one more night, hoping to find answers, but deep down, we knew we were making a grave mistake. The second night was worse. The whispers had grown into a cacophony of voices, each one more insistent than the last. Sleep was impossible. I lay in my tent, clutching the journal, trying to decipher its cryptic warnings. Outside, the trees swayed violently, their branches scratching against the tent like skeletal fingers. My heart raced with every gust of wind, every rustle of leaves. The sense of being watched had intensified, becoming almost unbearable. By morning, our nerves were frayed. The journal's entries had taken a darker turn, describing the disappearance of previous campers and the presence of malevolent entities. Fear gnawed at us, but curiosity kept us going. We decided to explore the old camp ruins more thoroughly. As we ventured out, the forest seemed to close in around us, the trees whispering secrets only they knew. The air was thick with tension, and every step felt like a march toward our doom. In the ruins, we found more signs of recent activity. Footprints crisscrossed the ground, leading deeper into the forest. The voices grew louder, more distinct, almost as if they were following us. My friends and I exchanged nervous glances, each of us feeling the weight of the unknown pressing down. We discovered an old, broken radio in one of the cabins, its static-filled hum adding to the eerie atmosphere. Desperation began to set in. That evening, as we gathered around the fire, the voices became clearer. They spoke of old secrets and forgotten curses, their words weaving a tapestry of fear and dread. We tried to contact the outside world using the radio, but all we received was static. Panic began to take hold as we realized we were truly alone. Then, without warning, one of our group, Sarah, disappeared. One moment she was there, the next she was gone, swallowed by the darkness. Fear turned to terror as we searched for Sarah. The forest seemed to mock us, every sound and shadow playing tricks on our minds. The voices grew louder, more frantic, as if urging us to leave. But we couldn't abandon Sarah. We split into groups, each taking a different direction. As I ventured deeper into the woods, the trees seemed to close in around me, their whispers filling my mind. I felt a cold, creeping dread, knowing that we were running out of time. The whispers grew louder as I ventured deeper into the forest, each step feeling like a descent into madness. The trees seemed to twist and turn, creating an ever-changing maze. Panic gnawed at my insides as I called out for Sarah, my voice trembling with fear. The forest swallowed my cries, returning only the sinister whispers. My flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced menacingly around me. As I searched, I stumbled upon a small clearing. There, in the center, lay a torn piece of Sarah's jacket. My heart pounded in my chest as I picked it up, the fabric cold and damp. The ground around the clearing was disturbed, as if something had been dragged through the dirt. The voices in my head grew more frantic, urging me to leave, but I couldn't abandon Sarah. Fear gripped me, but determination pushed me forward. Suddenly, a rustling in the bushes caught my attention. I turned, my flashlight illuminating a pair of glowing eyes staring back at me. My breath caught in my throat as I realized the entity was watching me, its presence palpable. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, filling my mind with a sense of impending doom. I took a step back, my heart racing, knowing that whatever was out there was not of this world. In a blind panic, I stumbled through the forest, my thoughts a jumbled mess of fear and desperation. The entity seemed to follow me, always just out of sight, its glowing eyes a constant reminder of the danger I was in. I tripped over roots and branches, the forest closing in around me. The whispers had turned into a deafening chorus, each one a cry for help or a warning of doom. I knew I had to find the others, to warn them of the creature stalking us. Exhausted and terrified, I finally found my way back to the camp. The fire had dwindled to embers, casting long shadows that danced eerily. My friends were huddled together, their faces pale with fear. They had not found Sarah. We exchanged desperate glances, each of us knowing that our situation had grown dire. The entity was closing in, and the forest had become a place of nightmares. We had to escape, but deep down, we knew the whispering pines would not let us go. Desperation filled the air as we huddled together, trying to come up with a plan. The forest was alive with whispers, growing louder and more insistent. We knew we had to find Sarah, but the darkness seemed to swallow every step we took. My friends and I decided to split into pairs, hoping to cover more ground. Each of us carried a flashlight and a weapon, though we knew they offered little protection against the unknown entity lurking in the shadows. My partner, Jake, and I ventured deeper into the forest, the twisted trees casting ominous shadows around us. The whispers seemed to follow us, growing louder with each step. We moved cautiously, every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig sending chills down our spines. The journal's warnings echoed in my mind, describing the entity as a creature that thrived on fear. We pressed on, our resolve fueled by the need to find Sarah and escape the nightmare we had stumbled into. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the distance, shrouded in darkness. We froze, our flashlights trembling in our hands. The figure moved closer, and I realized with a sinking heart that it was Sarah. She looked pale and disoriented, her eyes wide with terror. Relief washed over us as we rushed to her side, but our relief was short-lived. Sarah's voice trembled as she spoke of the entity, describing it as a malevolent force that had been following her. We decided to make our way back to the camp, but the forest seemed to have other plans. The path twisted and turned, leading us deeper into the heart of the whispering pines. The whispers grew deafening, filling our minds with dread. Jake and I tried to keep Sarah calm, but the fear in her eyes mirrored our own. The entity's presence was palpable, a constant reminder that we were not alone. We stumbled upon an old, decayed cabin, its walls covered in strange symbols. Inside the cabin, we found more remnants of previous campers, personal belongings, old photographs, and scattered notes. The atmosphere was suffocating, the air thick with a sense of impending doom. As we searched for anything that could help us, the whispers turned into screams. The entity was close, too close. We barricaded the door, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. Sarah clutched the journal, her hands trembling. The final entry spoke of a way to banish the entity, but it required a sacrifice. As we huddled in the decayed cabin, the weight of the journal's final entry pressed down on us. The whispers outside had turned into an unearthly chorus of screams, each one more chilling than the last. Sarah's hands shook as she clutched the journal, her eyes wide with fear. The entry described a ritual that could banish the entity, but required a sacrifice. One of us would have to stay behind. The realization hit us like a punch to the gut. Jake and I exchanged desperate glances, the gravity of our situation sinking in. The cabin's walls seemed to close in around us, the air thick with dread. Sarah's voice trembled as she read the instructions for the ritual. We needed to form a circle, hold hands, and recite the incantation from the journal. The entity would be drawn to the circle, and one person would have to break it, luring the creature away while the others escaped. It was a grim choice, but our only hope. We prepared for the ritual, our hearts heavy with the knowledge of what was to come. The cabin shuddered as the entity's presence grew stronger, its shadowy form pressing against the walls. We stood in a circle, our hands clasped tightly together. Sarah began to recite the incantation, her voice wavering but determined. The air around us grew colder, the whispers turning into a deafening roar. The entity was close, drawn by the power of the ritual. As Sarah's voice rose, the entity materialized before us, its twisted form a nightmare made real. Its eyes burned with malevolent light, and it let out a guttural growl. The circle held, but we knew the final moment was near. Jake looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and resolve. He nodded, and I knew what he intended. With a sudden, desperate movement, he broke the circle and charged at the entity, drawing it away from us. The entity turned its attention to Jake, its eyes locking onto him with predatory focus. He ran into the forest, the creature hot on his heels. The screams of the forest faded as they disappeared into the darkness. Sarah and I stood frozen, our hearts breaking for our friend. We had no choice but to run. We fled the cabin, the path out of the whispering pines miraculously clear. The forest seemed to part for us, guiding us to safety. We reached the edge of the forest, our breaths ragged and our bodies exhausted. Behind us, the whispering pines loomed, a dark and silent sentinel. Jake's sacrifice had given us our freedom, but the cost was immeasurable. We could never forget the horrors we had faced, nor the friend we had lost. The whispers of the forest would haunt us forever, a grim reminder of the nightmare that lurked within the trees. As we walked away, I knew the whispering pines would never truly let us go.